Hello and welcome to another episode of But Have You Heard About Your Government? I'm your host, Courtney, as always, and today I am joined by one of our former guests, Becky.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Becky. I am super excited because we're going to go a little bit more in depth than what we did the last episode about government, where we just kind of talked about checks and balances and laid kind of the framework, groundwork in a sense, to talking more in depth about not only the three branches, but how they interact and how you get to where our government is in a sense. Today, we're going to talk about the legislative branch, but specifically, we're going to talk about representatives and how do we get those representatives? How do we come up with these numbers? Because 435 makes no sense, honestly. You're like, where did this number come from? Did it fall from the sky? Has it always been 435 for those House representatives? The answer is no. We'll totally talk about it later. Just to give a quick recap, if you completely forgot about what Congress is, which is basically the two voting bodies of the legislative branch. Congress is the branch, which is the Senate and the House of Representatives, and special agencies and offices that provide support services to Congress. American citizens have the right to vote for senators and representatives through free, confidential ballots. Unlike the before times of being part of England, where literally when you would go vote as a landowning male, they would be like, who did you vote for? And it would literally be like the lord of the area. And he would just be like, you didn't vote for my son? And you'd have to be like, maybe. And they would just look at your ballot. So confidentiality, at least we got that going for us in the U.S.
Well, and let me all butt in here and say, Americans tend to think that we've always had the right to vote ourselves, but that's not true, as you will discuss a little bit further on, that no, every Tom, Dick, and Harry, and no women or Black people, of course, did not get to vote in the beginning. So we had to come up with that right as well.
Yeah, you had to own land and be a man to vote. So if you happen to be an indentured servant or somebody who was renting out like a farm or a cottage during the early times of the US, you couldn't vote. So it was landowning men, white men specifically. So there are 2 elected senators per state, totaling 100 senators because we have 50 states. And the Senate has 6 years to a term, and there's no limit on the number of terms an individual can serve. The House of Representatives has 435 elected representatives, which are divided among the 50 states in proportion to their total population. There are additional non-voting delegates who represent the District of Columbia, as well as other territories. A representative serves a 2-year term, and there is no limit to the number of terms an individual can serve. Yay! You can serve forever. That's why we have people that have literally been sitting in Congress since like the 80s.
Forever. Yeah. And I really think that it's high time we think about some term limits for some of these people, allow some new blood into our houses. Because as you say, some of these guys have been serving forever.
Yeah.
And it gives them a lot of time to get entrenched, to have lobbyists and all kinds of stuff that doesn't necessarily represent the welfare of their constituency.
Exactly. But they also have such a well-known name.
Sometimes I've wondered if maybe we should make it some sort of public service that certain people just get rotated through the House of Representatives. But I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that.
I think that's a good thing to ponder, and not even like rotating people out. So let's say that you've literally been a House of Rep member for 10 terms. So that's 20 years. And you haven't really changed much. A great example is Charlie Wilson, who was out in East Texas. There's a lovely movie about him called Charlie Wilson's War, has Tom Hanks.
Yes, I've seen it.
And he was a rep forever. He wanted nothing from no one. East Texas needs nothing from no one unless they're like, hey, we want this. And he would get what he wanted because he would basically scratch everybody else's back. And so when he needed a back scratch for East Texas, which wasn't very often, he'd get what he wanted. He was well known, well liked, because a lot of people from Texas are well liked. Let's just be honest. You go to a foreign country and you say you're from Texas, people get real excited and they bring up Walker, Texas Ranger, always. But you have people who've literally served for years. There's no term limits, and there's not any sort of age limit either, other than you have a requirement age that you have to be, but there is no, you are past the age of retirement in this country, maybe you should retire. It's ironic to me that we elect such older people and they've been there for so long, and it seems as though they try to say that they're either progressive or they're staunch in their ways, kind of like you said, being entrenched, and we don't really get as much progress going on in either direction. And it feels like we're just at a standstill because you have people who've been there for so long that are so used to running things how they want to.
So I think that's a really good point. I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about it so much. I know that as a senator, you have to be at least 30 years old. And let's see, as a member of the House, what's the minimum, Courtney? Probably about the same thing. 25 years old.
Yeah.
How different would things be if there were a lot more 30 or 40 years old running around trying to do things as opposed to people who are 60, 70, and 80? I mean, the people at the highest ranks of the House and the Senate, look at Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell both. Now, this is not anything to say about our older population. They're
right.
smart, they're active. 80 is the new 60. But still, it limits the ability of younger people who are interested in government and politics to get in on the ground floor if the older people at the top are not moving on. And personally, I think that's one reason why a lot of people don't like AOC. Not that she's such a progressive, but that she's young and, that she's a she.
Yep.
Young, and she's outspoken. And I think that really riles up a lot of the old school people in the House.
Yeah, I really do think you're onto something, especially with AOC. There were people that when she ran to unseat another Democrat that had been there for so long, she was told you need to wait your turn.
Yeah.
And I find that very mind-boggling. There's no reason to, quote unquote, wait your turn when you're like, I can do this. I would love to run for city council in San Antonio.
Ooh, do it.
But anyways, back to this lovely Congress and the legislative branch. How do we ever get to two parts of Congress? Why can't there be just one? Well, back when our country was a little baby, and little babies are throw tantrums all the damn time, which is literally what all the representatives did during the Revolutionary War, before the Revolutionary War, and after the Revolutionary War. It took until George Washington was basically gone being president before, honestly, the states started kind of working together. Anyways, we had the Virginia versus New Jersey plan, and then we had a happy compromise with the Connecticut plan. So first off, I love to just talk mad things about Jersey. Ain't no one really about Jersey, but here we are with the Jersey Plan. Our country based off appeasing a Bon Jovi lookalike from the late 1700s is how I like to think about it. But appeasement is needed at every stage of marriage between a crazy mix of family like the original states. So let's talk a little bit about this New Jersey Plan, because again, we need all three of these plans to get to where we are now. So you have a New Jersey Plan. It's favored by smaller states. I mean, obviously, New Jersey's not really a big state like now or ever. And it called for unicameral Congress with equal representation for the states. And it sounds a lot like the Senate, right? Everybody's represented equally. Thanks for the Senate, Jersey Shore. Next up, we have the Virginia Plan. And it's a bicameral Congress, bi meaning two. The lower house would be elected directly by the people, and the upper house would be elected by the lower house. This plan was based on population, which states like Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts would prosper. Obviously, we don't think of population booms in Massachusetts, but back then, Massachusetts was rocking. Obviously, when you put these two plans together, they are very different. And if we got to be a family and all live on the same continent together and be in the same country, we got to get the family to pick that summer vacation. And I guess we're all going to go with the Connecticut trip. Let's talk a little bit about the Connecticut Compromise. That was reached one house of Congress, the House of Representatives, would provide proportional representation, whereas the other, obviously the Senate, would provide equal representation. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about our upper house first, because that seems to be the fancier house in a sense. They get 6-year terms and they get to be on TV a lot more than usually your House reps, because there's more House reps and more people remember senators.
Let's remind people that the period of time we're talking about is the way back when we were still flying the Betsy Ross flag. And there were only 13 states. So imagine, we're talking about 100 senators today. But back then, we're still only talking about 26 senators, a very, very small group of people compared to what we have now. So, keep that in mind. It was a very, very different world.
And women couldn't do anything except for make flags, apparently. So obviously, this is all men's shenanigans, and they're the reason we're at where we are.
So, interesting fact here, Abigail Adams, who was the wife of our second president, John Adams, the senior, I read a biography of her recently, and she had some very interesting notions about the right to vote. And she had very strong feelings that we should have very selective criteria for who we allowed to vote, which I was shocked because, John Adams, right? So she didn't think that just anybody should get to vote, that you should have an education and money, land. I don't remember all the details, but she was definitely not for equal representation as far as voting rights went. So I thought that was really interesting because this is the time period we're talking about here.
Yeah. I think also when you come from a place of privilege back in that time, like Abigail Adams was from, you can look down and be like, I don't want my neighbor down. I don't want my cousin Eddie down the street doing these, getting to vote. Basically.
Right. I don't want my milkmaid having the right to vote, or the blacksmith or whatever. Yeah. It was very snobbish.
It is. It's a very privileged view, and you can definitely use it now where people are like, the 1% should be the ones who decide everything for us. And I'm like, but the 1%, the 99% should, at least have a chance.
Yeah.
We're going to start at the beginning, talking about the ratification of the U.S. Constitution in 1788 led to a transition from Congress under the Articles of Confederation to a new federal government. Yay! From 1789 to 1913, senators were elected by state legislators. And while that does sound kind of cool, back then, again, early on in the development of this country, you have states that are like, I can literally be on my own. I don't need you. I can go, Virginia's like, look, we can literally take a chunk out of the middle of this country and have a toll, and we can thrive from southern states trying to go to northern states. And people were like, look, we got to appease everybody. Again, it's early years of marriage, and there's like a lot of kids, and they're all ridiculous.
And they're all fighting. Yes. There was a lot of vested interests going on then. Yep.
So the framers of the Constitution considered several options, including selection of these senators by the House of Representatives and direct election by people, which is what we currently have. Ultimately, the framers decided on a method of election that had been utilized in selecting delegates to attend the convention itself: election by state legislators. This was a tactic the framers used to try to persuade the smaller seeming state governments that the representatives wouldn't be just popular vote like the House, and that it wouldn't let the central government get too powerful. It makes sense for the time, but we'll talk about it later that there was so much corruption in how this was being handled, and that there were state legislators that just wouldn't replace the sitting senator when they passed away. They couldn't decide because some states needed it to be unanimous. Some states just needed a majority. A lot of things moving, just like with election day, and every state is different, as well as every county in every state is different.
Doesn't that seem self-defeating to you? Why would some state legislature not want to replace 50%, essentially, one of two members of the Senate, and not have it gives them a disadvantage when the Senate would go to vote for things? That's just weird to me. It's like, I don't know.
So the ones that would drag their feet, those state legislators, basically had a unanimous decision had to be reached, and they couldn't reach a unanimous decision. With that passage of the new amendment, they let out all these criteria.
Sounds like everybody being all over the place. It was a good idea, finally, when they decided this is just not working and we need to let the people vote for their senators.
Yes, and that is a great segue, because beginning with the 1914 general election, all U.S. senators have been chosen by direct popular election. 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment also provided for the appointment of senators to fill vacancies. Thank God for the 17th, so we can vote instead of our state legislator. Because heaven forbid the Texas state legislator. I don't think that, we both live in Texas. I really don't think the state legislator would pick someone like John Cornyn and Ted Cruz. I think that you would have either two Ted Cruzes or two John Cornyns with our state legislator.
That is a very interesting mental exercise to go down.
It is. So what were some of the reasons for the amendment? Well, the arguments for the 17th Amendment are grounded in the case for direct democracy, which is what we have with the House, the problem of hung state legislators, which we've touched base on, and in freeing the Senate from the influence of corrupt state legislators. Corruption definitely ain't new, apparently. Do you know who William Randolph Hearst is?
Oh, yes.
Awesome. We're going to talk a little bit about him because he played a minimal role in this, but he famously hired muckraking journalist David Graham Phillips to write an expose, The Treason of the Senate, which played a major role in debates around the 17th Amendment. The popular perception that Senate seats could be bought in backrooms of state legislators fueled support for direct elections. Further, several Senate seats remained open for years when state legislators couldn't agree on a choice, although the importance of this is somewhat questionable and was attributable to a federal statute that required the senators to be elected by a majority of state legislators, not a plurality, and state legislators, a requirement that notably was not included for popular elections in the 17th Amendment. In recent years, however, the 17th Amendment has come under some criticism from conservatives like Justice Antonin Scalia, columnist George Will, and a host of Republicans in Congress for removing an important power from state legislators.
That statement is positively frightening to me because it sounds a lot like they think we should go back old school and let the state legislatures speak for the people because we know they do it so well.
Of course. I was like, so why do senators get to be not elected by the people, but yet you're thinking that we can elect our state legislators and they're somehow going to have this? And I'm like, there's no reason to involve a state government in that because all it's doing is putting more on their plate on things they have to vote and have to pass, and they have to change their meeting schedule too, probably.
So here's an interesting thought too. It makes state legislators susceptible to being bought and paid for by big business, lobbyists, etc., to land the right people. They can't do that when individuals are voting.
Yes.
So I find the whole idea, of course, Scalia is dead, so we don't have to worry about him.
Yeah, but there's people like him.
There are others like him on the court.
Constitutionalists?
Yes, there you go. Like they knew what the framers were exactly thinking.
Yeah.
Anyway,
they have tea with the founding fathers in their dreams.
Exactly. That's a whole nother. We go deep into the Supremes, but we won't do that. But still, it's very concerning to me that there are those who would want to return that power to state legislatures. And I bet you there's a lot of people out there that don't know that little tasty fact. So good on you, Courtney.
I honestly was surprised. I knew that senators at one point were not elected by the people. And going back and looking through stuff and looking up other historical tidbits for parts of different podcasts and seeing that legitimately big businesses would pay a lot of money to state legislators to vote for senators or to get senators in that would uphold what they wanted. One of them was like the liquor business. Yeah. So basically, we got prohibition because we finally got rid of senators being paid for by people in the liquor business. Thanks to this, we got prohibition. Thank God I was not alive then, let alone during a pandemic. But yeah, so always fun and definitely a lot of corruption. And I think it would just go back to being corrupt. I cannot imagine having the Texas legislature try to pick a senator because I don't think it would be Cornyn or Cruz. You wouldn't have both. You would have one or the other, and it would just be two of the same.
Very interesting notion.
As you may probably know, and maybe other people don't know, but we don't vote for all senators at once. So there are Senate positions that are divided into three classes. Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution requires the Senate to be divided into three classes for purposes of elections, because it would be kind of weird to vote for all 100 of them every 6 years. So they spread them out, and approximately 1/3 of the senators face election or re-election every 6 years. So this year we only had a third in the 2020 election. In 2022, there will be another third up. And in 2024, the last third will be up for election. Obviously, there are special elections and things like that. But whenever we have an election style podcast, we will totally talk about special elections and shenanigans and blah, 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 blah. So something you also had alluded to a little earlier was about one of the requirements for being a senator, which is age. They have to be at least 30 years of age, unlike the president, which is 35. Have been a citizen of the United States for 9 years, so they can be foreign born technically, and when elected, be a resident of the state from which he or she is chosen. And I find that weird that there's not a requirement that you had to have lived in the state for X amount of years before you try to rep it.
Oh, yeah, because we know that's totally a loophole that people have used to get elected to the Senate. I just moved me to some state and put myself up for Senate. Yeah, that's happened. We know it's happened.
Well, I mean, if we want to go ahead and play that card, Hillary Clinton did it by moving to New York.
Yes, she did. New York, absolutely. That is a fact. Whether you like her or not, that was a strategy she used to get in the Senate. Yep.
Look, I mean, at least you got to say people got strategy and they follow through, and I'm not mad about that. So how do we vote on these senators? During general elections and special elections held by local government. However, if a vacancy occurs during a senator's death, resignation, or expulsion from the Senate, the 17th Amendment allows state legislators to empower the governor to appoint a replacement to complete the term or to hold office until a special election can take place. There are a few exceptions to this rule. Some states require a special election to fill a vacancy. A few states require the governor to appoint a replacement of the same political party as the previous incumbent.
Oh, so let's talk about that a little bit, because if you, and I don't mean you, I mean your listeners in general, if you believe that Joe Biden is the president-elect with Kamala Harris, which I do,
Yep.
She is currently a sitting senator for the state of California. So what happens to her position? Well, in California, the governor will appoint her replacement.
Do you know if in California they have to do the same political party, or can it be any party?
That I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't know. But I also know that, this is a consideration, is how senators would be replaced, because in considering his potential cabinet and other positions of the administration, Biden may choose to bypass certain people who might be qualified because of the potential loss of their seats in the Senate, and who might be either voted or selected to replace them. So This is a really, really big deal right now, because of the potential control or no control of the Democratic Party over the Senate. There's a lot of big questions going on right now.
Yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed watching people play fantasy administration team.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. That's crazy. Yeah.
And I was like, look, I love Elizabeth Warren. She was my candidate. She was who I wanted to be president because I love a woman with a plan. But I'm like, you take her out of her state, like, it's not going to stay a Democrat after she's gone. Like, she's elected because of who she is, not because she's a Democrat.
Yeah. That's a huge factor. The woman is brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant. She probably would have made an incredible cabinet position. But can her state afford to lose her as a representative? That's a big question.
Yeah. And another one I saw was Stacey Abrams. I love Stacey Abrams. I would love for her to be a part of the cabinet for anything or have any position. But at the same time, I'm like, she is such a local grassroots mover and shaker. She honestly needs to run for governor again. And she's already declared that she's running for governor in 2022, which I'm very excited for, because she basically got beat by the person who got to control where ballot boxes went. She barely lost as well. And she flipped Georgia blue.
Yes, she was absolutely extremely responsible for what happened with the Georgia electorate this cycle.
Yeah.
She is an incredibly valuable member of the Democratic Party's team in that state.
Exactly.
I adore her as well. I love a strong, smart, and the girl, she got chops. I mean, come on, strong, smart, well-spoken, and she has the people of Georgia's best interests at heart. So It's going to be, she is a rising star. It'll be interesting to see where she goes. But you're right. Unfortunately, she will serve best in Georgia and not in the federal administration.
Yep. Well, enough about these elitist 6-year term holding people.
Yeah.
Let's original populist elect part of Congress, the House of Representatives. So they are considered the lower house of Congress, and it's based on population. But how do we get the number of reps per state? This was something that we both wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
So I can go on and talk about the census. First off, if you haven't done the census, shame on you. You're not counted, and you're the reason why your district's going to get gerrymandered to heck, because you probably didn't vote either if you didn't do your census. So anyways, the Constitution does not set the size of the House of Representatives. Until the 1920s, its size changed every census. So like after every census, the size changed, and it expanded to reflect the nation's growing population. However, the 1920 census created controversy within Congress over which states should receive new seats. Because again, we are basically toddlers, and that was all men. And of course, they're going to fight. A resolution emerged in 1929 when the size of the House was frozen at what it happened to be at the 1910 census, which is 435 seats, where we get the magical number of 435 now, regardless of population growth. Congress has capped the number of representatives at 435 since the Apportionment Act of 1911, except for a temporary increase to 437 during the admission of Hawaii and Alaska estates in 1959. As a result of this, over the last century, congressional districts have more than tripled in size, from an average of roughly 212,000 inhabitants after the 1910 census to about 710 inhabitants following the 2010 census. We don't have numbers for 2020, though we definitely can assume that they're going to be larger than 710,000.
Yeah.
Each state's congressional delegation changes as a result of population shifts, with states either gaining or losing seats based on population. While the number of House members for each state is determined according to a statistical formula in federal law, each state is then responsible for designing the shape of its districts, so long as it accords with various provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which seeks to protect racial minorities' voting and representation rights. I'm going to pause for a second because we know how crazy some of these districts look.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to note what your district looks like. You know, a neighborhood across the street looks just like yours, but however, they're not in the same district as you.
Right.
And when I say looks like you, I mean by socioeconomic background, demographically, looks just like you, but it's part of another district. And it's not just Texas. Every state looks a little crazy.
Yeah.
So to finish out the membership of Congress, or the membership of the House of Representatives, there's a total membership of the House of Representatives that is 441, not to be confused with that 435, because all 435 are from those 50 states. However, there are 5 non-voting delegates that represent the District of Columbia and the U.S. territories of Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa. Non-voting residential commissioner serving a 4-year term represents the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Again, they have to abide by U.S. laws, but they're not getting to vote. So territories, in my opinion, should have better representation, maybe not senators, but definitely deserve to have some House of Rep.
I totally agree. I think that those people are living under U.S. law and they have a right to participate how U.S. law happens.
Exactly. And it shouldn't just be primaries. Primaries are stupid because
they're meaningless.
And if they were all on the same day, it'd be a little bit better, but they're not, and it's stupid. Anyways, I hate primaries. There's so many. Okay. So once the state knows how many reps it gets from the census, who decides on these boundaries? That's a great point, because it's your state government that outlines the boundaries for not only your local elections for state and Senate reps, but also your congressional reps. Is this a perfect process? Of course not. If you live close to a boundary, you may be pushed to a new district over the course of a few decades. Also, people that live less than a mile from you may be in a different district, while you are lumped together with people hundreds of miles away. It's a process that is known to be gerrymandered. No, this isn't about Jerry Seinfeld in some sort of fashion. It's more annoying than watching that show with your friend that shoves you at every joke on the screen. Gerrymandering is when a political group tries to change a voting district to create a result that helps them or hurts the group who is against them.
Yep.
We already alluded to this because gerrymandering happens all the time.
Yep.
But why do politicians do this? Power. Because throughout history, white men love power, and power is thrilling to some people, obviously.
It's all about the power.
While districts are supposed to follow any guidelines in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, does it? Of course not. But sadly, on June 27, 2019, the Supreme Court, by a 5-4 vote, ruled that claims of unconstitutional partisan gerrymandering are not subject to federal court review because they present non-justicable political questions, removing the issue from the federal court's purview. So it's not up to the federal government to police gerrymandering, sadly.
Which means because it's left to the states as part of states' rights, it will never change unless you can get different people somehow leveraged into the state legislature to make it happen.
Yeah, it's never going to change. You can't say that it's just one political party or the other, because literally they both do it. Even back in probably the 1800s, the Whig Party did it. Then the non-Whig Party did it. The Republicans back then did it. The whatever you want to call any party ever that's been in charge of a state legislator. Ever since minorities and women had the right to vote, there's been more gerrymandering involved because you want to make sure that you put them closer together. So if you have, let's say, looking at demographics as you would with a census, being like, oh, there's a lot of minorities that live in this area. We can put them all together and they will most likely vote in one certain fashion because people like to put everybody in a box. And that's wrong. You shouldn't put everybody in a box. Who can be my gerrymandering House of Representatives rep? As we alluded to earlier, you have to be at least 25 years old, a citizen of the United States for at least 7 years, and an inhabitant of the state he or she represents. Again, they can literally move to the state. You don't even have to live in your district.
Right. That's just ridiculous. Since you're supposed to be representing a district of people, and one assumes that the districts in our area have different needs than the districts in the Permian Basin or in Dallas or in East Texas, right?
Yeah.
So for crying out loud, if you don't live in your district and you don't know what the people you're supposed to be representing need, then you have no business representing them.
Exactly, precisely. And when it comes to being a local rep, like I completely agree with you. Back to these lovely House of Reps. How often do we vote on them? Every 2 years. All of them are up for election every even year, unlike our senators. You vote for them in presidential elections and governor elections, just voting all the time for them. Besides elections, there are other reasons voting may need to happen. House vacancies can be caused by death, resignation, declination, withdrawal, or House action. But the Constitution requires it to be filled by an election, unlike a senator. So the law concerning members elected to fill vacancies varies according to when the vacancy occurs and applicable state law. State governors would set up the process for an election. It's super fun.
I'm wondering, what do you think, Courtney? Do you think that 2 years is a long enough term for a representative? Do they have time to actually get in and learn anything about how anything works or do anything in 2 years' time?
Yeah, I was like, I really wish you could see my head. I'm just shaking my head the whole time. No, 2 years is nothing, especially for that position. I really think it should be 4 years.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, if you extended the House of Rep position, you would need to extend at least the president to be longer than them. And I'm not really ready for that in my life.
Yeah, no. I guess, if you have a representative who seems to be doing a good job and making headway, that they'll get reelected. They'll get there 4 years. I guess it's a little bit like the mayor of San Antonio was just a 2-year term, isn't it? Don't we vote every 2 years for mayor?
We vote every 2 years for mayor as well as city council.
There you go. So it's kind of like I've always felt like 2 years for mayor just does not seem like it should be long enough. So that's why I asked the question. It's something to think about, but you're right. That trickles uphill.
Yeah, it's one of the very few Reaganomics things that I feel is a good term to use. It is a trickle theory as opposed to trickle down.
Yes.
Because I'm like, if you make the House of Reps 4 years, even if you made them 3 years, and then you made presidents 5, which then confuses everybody because then it goes even year, odd year, even year, odd
year. That messes up the whole thing, that presidents who are elected in a year ending with 0 will get assassinated. But that's another fun topic.
Oh gosh, that's like a conspiracy theory.
I know.
Oh, look, Becky, I don't know if I want to do that one with Matt because he doesn't find government conspiracy theories as exciting as I do. He's just like, oh, well, that was fun. It's the government. Of course they're up to no good. I'm like, obviously.
Oh, well, we could do the run through the whole list of all the ones that contributed to that theory.
Yeah, so. I like it. We had talked a little beforehand, and you had mentioned talking about when people usually learn about government.
Yeah.
And civics in general. And I mentioned that my senior year of high school, I took advanced placement. So my little AP class nerds out there, I took the government and the economics class, and they happened to both be in the fall semester. Took that AP test in the spring. The government one I did fine on, but it was only for a semester. So I don't remember how much I actually learned and retained, because when I went to college, I remembered a lot, and it was stuff that we kind of went over. But again, not everybody goes to college and not everybody had to take those classes. And I enjoyed it because it had a lot of historical aspects to it. I don't think people understand how their government works. And I think they need it in small doses. Because again, I'm obviously a doctor when it comes to history and political facts. You need small doses of this history and knowledge on a regular basis to understand.
I totally agree. I think the problem is that I don't know that we teach civics at a good point. Grade school, I just don't know that sticks, right?
It
I mean,
doesn't.
it's all fine and Bill if you learn, all fine and good if you learn the little I am a Bill song, that's targeted towards kids. But wouldn't you be better able to remember and understand the Constitution and civics when you've actually had some decent American history under your belt than to maintain it? People today are so upset and concerned about how the election has gone and how things work in the process. You see over and over again news outlets who have to detail this is what happens, right?
Yep.
Because people don't know. They don't know. They never knew. They don't remember, or they choose not to know or remember accurately. And so that gives rise to all kinds of crazy theories about how things should or shouldn't work, because we don't know as well as we should the history of our own government and our electoral process.
Yep. I think Texas has a bad problem of teaching to a test.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were just able to learn, also as adults, we have a really, really bad time about continuing education.
Yeah.
It's not just for certain professions. Everyone should try to learn a little bit more. We also have a problem that when we grew up, we're different in age, but when I grew up, it was a lot of you can respect and also not respect, but you can assume that is what is coming out of the television on news is correct.
Yes.
And they are telling you the truth. We've gone away from that. And I'm not going to knock any one news channel because all of them do it. A lot of times they try to fix themselves, but unless you're going to watch PBS, you're going to get some sort of almost not like one-sided, but you're going to get a personal opinion view with facts, as opposed to just getting facts sometimes.
When I was growing up, and yes, there is a big difference in our ages. When I was a kid growing up, there were very few news outlets. You either watched the evening news, either ABC, CBS, NBC. That's all there was, those news outlets. Well, maybe there was PBS back then, but my dad would come home from work and he had to watch Walter Cronkite or Huntley Brinkley, the Huntley Brinkley show. For any old people who listen to your podcast, they'll remember this. People believed in them because they were journalists and they reported facts. They reported the news. And over time, I think that we have become confused. We confuse entertainment for news. And why is that? I'm going to take that all the way back to Ted Turner and CNN and bringing in all this time, these blocks, these huge blocks of time, and increasingly low barriers to entry for people to produce content. And some of that content is factual and some is just entertainment. And we shouldn't confuse the two. But so many people don't know and don't understand. They're not even perhaps interested in understanding the difference between what's entertainment and what is actual journalism or actual news. So it's very concerning, because when you can't tell the difference, how do you know what you're being told is true or false? And how do you make good decisions based on that information? So there we go. I sound like you kids get off of my lawn. That's
you don't. So the FCC had the fairness doctrine. It came out in the 40s. Basically, you couldn't have one side presented only when talking about an issue or an event, especially controversial things. It came into play a lot during the Vietnam War, because you had two very, very different sides. You had people who were like, we have to beat the commies. They're going to ruin the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And you had other people who were like, yo, we shouldn't kill people that didn't, try to kill us until we tried to kill them. News outlets, up until Reagan got rid of the fairness doctrine, had to present both sides. And they had to say where those things were. And they had to have a journalist who would point out the facts versus opinions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now you don't have to say that your show is an opinion. You can just call yourself a journalist. It's very weird. And I would say all 24-hour news stations have problems with it.
Yes, I think you're right. I don't think that there is anyone who has kept themselves, at least to the best of my awareness, wholly pure and clean journalism. There are some that are better than others. And I know that it's a good thing to avail yourself of different sources of news and information, just so you can make some informed decisions. But if you only immerse yourself in one little thing, then you will never be exposed to other information. So, and I think that is a huge source of some of our current miscommunications in this country. Very, very sad and unfortunate. Social media is going to kill us.
Yeah. We are at the end of talking about who reps me for our legislative branch. Is there any last minute or anything you want to talk about that we didn't talk about?
Let me just say, I challenge anyone to try to take the citizenship test themselves and just see how well they do. I think I would be rudely surprised at my own lack of knowledge. So anyone who's all over, immigrants and stuff, they probably know more about how the government works than a lot of us do who've been here for a long time. That would be a good little self-test.
I love it because that's very true. I am very certain that my friend who immigrated from Mexico knows more about the working government than a lot of people who vote on the reg that say they understand everything.
Yeah, I guarantee you are correct. Yep.
I'm sure Abigail Adams is very upset about that. Not about my friend passing the test and becoming, but the other people who have continued to vote just because they were born here. So with that, I'm Courtney, as always, your host. Today I was joined by Becky. We hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, evening, weekend. Maybe
Thank you for having me, Courtney. I really enjoyed our fun facts.
Yes, and we'll have to have you back again because the government is a lot of fun. Civics is fun to me.
Civics is fun. Yep.
All right, with that, have a good one, everyone. Bye.
Bye.